This is episode 1 of Learn Things Before You Die with Jack. So today we're going to be learning about the 944's engine cooling system. We will start this off with any good demonstration, a lovely pictogram that I've kindly drawn out for you. This here is the Porsche's 944 engine. We have here the radiator and we have here the coolant tank. If you can imagine this in its engine bay, it will become a lot more easier to understand. So we'll start with the water pump, which is located here on the engine block, and it is on the left hand side. It's driven from the timing belt, which runs between the crank pulley and the cam pulley. This is great because when we increase engine speed and have a higher demand for power, and then as a consequence of higher power we create more heat, we also drive the water pump faster in time of the engine to then dissipate coolant round of the engine. So we start with the water pump. It's being driven. It's a centrifugal pump, so it spins around and it forces water through fins and fans. The coolant then gets pushed around the engine block. If you can imagine the white space where the blue arrows are, if we imagine that as a void, we then fill that with water and then it creates this lovely sort of insulated layer that cools down the engine. The coolant is driven through the engine block and then up through a porthole into the engine head. It then does sort of a backward somersault round the head and then back down to here where there is either two ways for the coolant to go. It can go through a return valve into the radiator, or it can go through a bypass valve which then leads back into the water pump. Now, at the minute, for argument's sake, we will say we've just turned the engine on and therefore the thermostat located here is not active. Meaning this is a closed off system. No coolant is allowed to enter through this channel here. Because there's a blockage here, this blockage will block all the way up to here. So when the coolant comes down, it will have no choice but to go through the bypass valve, back through the pump, back through the cycle, over the somersault, and continues to go round and round and round. Now, there are a couple of other ways that the coolant can get to other component parts. Up here we have the heater matrix in the car. You turn on your fans, you set to hot, and it then turns on a heater control valve, which then allows the coolant to come through, heat up a radiator here, which aids in your heating system, and then it comes back through this return line here, back into the water pump. And then it gets pushed back round through the block, up through the portholes, back through the head, and then it starts its vicious cycle. So now we've got water going through the block over and over again, and we've got the heaters on as well, so it's going through the heating system too. Eventually, the coolant will get quite hot. 80 degrees to be precise is when the thermostat begins to open. 90 degrees is when the thermostat is open, allowing coolant to come from the radiator into its cycle. At this point, we're now creating a void in the radiator, or a pocket of air if you like, and it now allows this sort of traffic jam of coolant here to free up, and it starts moving round, and you can start to see how that works. We have two additional lines here. We have a reservoir filler line, which will then fill the radiator if it requires extra coolant in the system. And we also have a return line here, which pushes through any coolant or air out of the system back into the reservoir. There is a third line that I haven't drawn, but if you can imagine a cap right here, there is a line that falls off that, as the cap, once it reaches a certain pressure, will release and then allow excess coolant to dump out, and it just gets dumped onto the floor through a line. This, in essence, is the Porsche 944's cooling system. If you want a bit more of a in-depth schematic, as you can see, it's a very similar layout, except these component parts here, like the thermostat, although it is part of the water pump, it's been split off so you can get a better idea of how everything works together. So in a nutshell, that is the 944's cooling system. Why did you need to know that? You might not, but it's always interesting to learn. I'm going to continue along with this series. The next thing I'm going to do is probably the fuel system, the braking system, the suspension system, and as much as I can possibly go through. So what I'll do, if it's useful to anyone, I'll upload a picture of my cooling system diagram that I made in Photoshop in about half an hour, but it might be useful for you in terms of diagnosing any leaks, in figuring out anything that might have gone wrong. or if you're trying to rebuild a system or whatever you're doing. So that in essence is pretty much all you need to know about the cooling system. There's not really much more to it other than the fact that there is an oil cooler attached to the engine block just below the exhaust on the left hand side. I didn't cover that because it's essentially just a bit of metal that comes out with a cooling oil cooling system inside, and then the coolant runs in and out of it. Thank you for watching, and follow me because I'm on like almost 600 followers, which is mental. Yeah, not that it does anything, but it makes me feel great.